Science has given us some of the greatest breakthroughs in all of human history. We're talking about cures for diseases, incredible feats of engineering, and a much deeper understanding of the universe itself. But what happens when that quest for knowledge goes too far? When the search for a breakthrough pushes brilliant minds to do things that are, well, unthinkable? No, really, just for a second, think about it. What lines would you refuse to cross? It's a question we all think has a pretty easy answer, right? But for some people, when they're right on the edge of discovery, that line gets terrifyingly blurry. And I'm not talking about a plot from some horror movie. This is a documented fact. An experiment run by doctors, paid for by a government, and performed on people who had no idea what was happening to them. So today, we're going to look at the anatomy of a scientific monster. What happens when that drive to discover completely takes over our own humanity? Let's start with a case that really pushes the limits of what you think is possible. Okay, so our first story kicks off in Guatemala, back in the 1940s. The United States government was, desperate to find better ways to fight sexually transmitted diseases. They were a huge problem for their soldiers. Their solution, though, was absolutely chilling. For 2 solid years, from 1946 to 1948, American doctors ran this secret study to see how well penicillin worked. But here's the catch. To test a cure, you first need the disease. So what did they do? They decided to give people the disease. Hundreds of people. All without their knowledge and definitely without their consent. And who did they pick for these horrifying experiments? Well, they picked the most vulnerable people they could find. People who couldn't say no. People who couldn't fight back. People whose voices they thought would never, ever be heard. We're talking prisoners, soldiers, and even patients in a mental institution. You have to have a certain kind of mindset to look at other human beings and see nothing more than a convenient collection of test subjects. The methods they used were just systematic and cruel. At first, they paid infected prostitutes to visit the prisoners, but when that wasn't working fast enough, the researchers got way more direct. They actually created these infectious mixtures from bacteria, scraped open the subject's skin, and just applied the disease right on them. In some cases, they injected syphilis bacteria straight into their spinal fluid. This wasn't some tragic mistake. This was a calculated, scientific procedure. And right here, this is the proof, in their own words, that they knew exactly what they were doing was wrong. This quote from one of the study's supervisors says it all. The concern wasn't for the people, the insane people who couldn't give consent. Nope, the concern was about getting caught. The fear wasn't about the evil they were doing, but about the hollering that would happen if anybody found out. That kind of blatant disregard for human life is it's shocking. But what happens when the experiment isn't about disease, but about our own human nature? Our next case takes us from the body to the mind, and it reveals just how thin that layer of civilization we all wear really is. So in 1971, a psychologist named Philip Zimbardo set up a fake prison right in the basement of Stanford University. The plan seems simple enough. Get a bunch of totally normal, healthy, well-adjusted college kids, flip a coin to make them either a prisoner or a guard, and then just watch what happens for 2 weeks. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Oh, everything went wrong, and it happened almost immediately. The students who were sound to be guards became cruel, sadistic even. They started dehumanizing the prisoners, putting them through all sorts of psychological abuse. And the prisoners, they became passive, helpless, and just emotionally shattered. And remember, these weren't bad people to begin with. They were good people who were put into a toxic situation that brought out their absolute worst. The experiment was supposed to last for 2 weeks. It had to be shut down after just 6 days. 6. That's all it took for a simple psychology study to spiral into a chamber of real, actual human suffering. All right, for our final case, we're shifting from the mind back to the body. But here, the ambition wasn't just to observe people or to cure them. It was to conquer life and death itself. It was, essentially, an attempt to play God. I know, this looks like something straight out of a nightmare, but it's real. Over in the Soviet Union, a scientist named Vladimir Demikhov was a pioneer in organ transplantation, and his most infamous work, creating 2-headed dogs. He would literally graft the head and front legs of one dog onto the body of another. Now, as horrifying as that is, these grotesque experiments actually laid the groundwork for modern human organ transplants. And that ambition didn't stop there. Here in the US, a neurosurgeon named Robert White took it to the next level. He successfully transplanted the head of one monkey onto the body of another, and the monkey survived. Its brain was fully functional. It could see, It could hear, it could taste. But because White couldn't connect the spinal cord, the monkey was completely paralyzed from the neck down. The ethical questions this raised were, and still are, just staggering. This brings us to a really important idea: hubris. It's an ancient Greek word for this kind of dangerous, God-defying overconfidence. It's that fatal flaw that pushes a hero toward their own destruction. It's the belief that you are so brilliant, so important, that the normal rules of morality they don't apply to you. So, here we are. We have three completely different, monstrously awful scenarios: secret disease experiments, a complete psychological breakdown, and surgical nightmares. On the surface, they don't seem connected at all. But what if? What if they're all just symptoms of the same sickness, a darkness that's rooted deep inside the human psyche? The great psychologist Carl Jung actually had a name for this. He called it the shadow. It's basically everything we don't want to admit about ourselves: our greed, our cruelty, our thirst for power. We just push it down and pretend it's not there. But Jung warned that when we deny our shadow, we don't get rid of it. We just give it more power to control us from the darkness. Now, modern psychology has a more clinical term for these kinds of shadow traits: the dark triad. It's basically a combo of three nasty personality types. First, there's narcissism, which is that inflated sense of self-importance. Then you have Machiavellianism, which is being willing to manipulate and deceive anyone to get what you want. And finally, psychopathy, which is a profound, chilling lack of empathy. When these traits come to the surface, they can fuel some truly monstrous acts. Okay, so let's apply this framework. That Guatemala study, it's a textbook, chilling example of psychopathy in action. To look at hundreds of human beings and see them as nothing more than walking petri dishes, that requires a complete and total shutdown of empathy. The victims weren't people anymore. They were just objects for an experiment. And the Stanford prison experiment, that shows us the explosive danger of narcissism. You give someone a uniform and just a little bit of power, and suddenly their ego can inflate to monstrous sizes. The guards felt entitled to dominate and humiliate the prisoners, which is a classic trait of unchecked narcissistic rage. And those head transplant experiments, that's pure Machiavellianism right there. The goal, conquering death, creating life in a totally new way, was so huge, so revolutionary, that the suffering of the animals they used to get there was just seen as an acceptable price to pay. For the truly Machiavellian mind, the ends always justify the means, no matter how grotesque those means are. So, where is that line? The one that separates a genius from a monster? Maybe it's not a line at all. Maybe it's more like a shadow that follows every single great mind, just waiting for a moment of unchecked ambition to step out into the light. These stories, they force us to look not just at the darkness in other people, but at the potential for it that exists in all of us. If this deep dive into the darker side of discovery got you thinking and challenged your perspective, you know what to do. Make sure to subscribe for more. And really think about it. What lines would you cross for a breakthrough?